Churches around Australia will need to drastically alter how they conduct youth ministry if they are to pass their faith on to the next generation and ensure their own survival, says new research from the Christian Research Association. The concerning proclamation comes after the CRA combined the findings of research conducted with the Anglican Diocese of Melbourne, the Salvation Army, the Catholic Diocese of Melbourne, and migrant communities, and discovered that youth ministry across the city of Melbourne was for the most part not optimised for today's conditions. This encouraged the CRA to hold an ecumenical youth ministry training day to share their findings with, as CRA senior researcher Philip Hughes put it, those at the coalface of youth ministry.
One of the most immediate things that was evident to us in the 23 case studies that we actually did was that the dominant patterns of youth ministry were very much orientated to the families of young people within the church. And we recognise that the youth work is actually not connecting with 90% of the youth in the wider community. At the moment, as we see it, we're not providing even the points of contact, the ways of engaging with the wider public through our churches. And so the questions arise, how can we best do that?
The research also pointed to a greater than expected similarity in what goes on in youth ministry across different churches and different denominations.
The approach to developing the Christian faith tended to revolve around Bible study, small groups where there was a fairly intense sort of training in perceiving how God was relevant to people's lives on a day-to-day basis. But Christian faith was generally seen as something very cognitive. It was what you believed.
Dr. Hughes says that what they found was that for young people, faith was more an expression of what one does.
Some of the kids we've spoken to in schools have said, look, I don't want to go to worship. I don't see that as my thing. But I do want to be involved, for example, in helping other people. And that's how I want to express my faith. We want to encourage greater diversity in youth ministry. Greater diversity in catering for different types of people, different ways of expressing faith, greater diversity in terms of recognising that young people are at very different points along the road, as it were.
The research also suggested that in many cases youth ministry had been hived off from the rest of the church, hindering its ability to flourish.
American researchers said that the youth ministry has greatest vitality when it's actually supported by and is central to the whole of the church. And so integrating youth ministry with the church as a whole, I think, is of huge importance. And thus we would encourage churches to actually be thinking about youth ministry and to involve the youth ministers in their decision making, in their setting of their budgets, in their planning and vision development for the church as a whole.
Youth ministry's importance to the life of various Christian faiths should not be underestimated. According to other research not conducted by the CRA, around 80% of people come to Christ before they are adults. Reverend Dave Fuller, who has been involved in youth ministry for almost 30 years, says this fact alone highlights why more effort should be dedicated to youth ministry at a local level.
If you listen to people's stories of how they became Christians and when and what was the process, it seems fairly plausible and reasonable that up to 80% do come to Christ while they're young. I'm not saying that people don't come to Christ later in life, but to me, if those statistics are true and they do ring true, then we need to be putting a lot of work in with respect to children, teenagers and young adults if we're going to see the faith passed on to the next generation and our churches remain strong.
Reverend Fuller says the context in which youth ministry is carried out has changed significantly since he began working with younger people, as you can no longer rely on family lines to replenish congregations. Add in the constantly and rapidly changing nature of youth culture, and it becomes clear why even talented youth ministry workers are struggling to connect.
They're further distance from the Christian faith. So you've got huge gaps out there now of any sort of connection to the church.
He also points out that the rise of the internet and social media over the last 15 years has been significant, presenting both challenges and opportunities for youth ministry.
Getting the word out is just so easy, it's fantastic. At that level, the communication is simple. But then the internet produces a lot of noise as well, and a lot of other foreign ideas and stuff. It's a mixed bag, but most media is, because human nature is both good and loving and kind and reflects God's image, and human nature is fallen and sinful. So any new technology reflects both those dimensions of human nature.
Yet even with these modern advances, Reverend Fuller says churches can still look to the early Christian churches of the New Testament for inspiration and practical methods for building strong, sustainable youth ministry.
The evangelistic methodologies of the New Testament, while not all of them are relevant, I would say most of them are quite eminently transferable into our setting.
However it's achieved, one thing is clear. There is no easy fix, but a long-term, sustainable youth ministry needs to be a focus of all Australian churches.
In the end, if churches aren't doing the work of passing faith on from one generation to the next, it eventually dies.